Welcome back to the Art of Fundraising. Welcome back, Aaron. Glad you could join us. Today, we're going to talk about how not to ask for money. It's an underappreciated art that you can stop asking for money if you learn to use the 7 questions that we've talked about in these sessions. What do you need to ask instead of asking for money? And that's what we're going to be talking about today. But before we dive into that, how's it going so far? How have these conversations affected you? What's coming up offline for you?
I guess the main thing is I just keep jotting down names of people that I'm thinking about approaching, and then they're all in my notebook, and I'm constantly jotting, and I'm going to organize them and then prioritize them so that I feel comfortable with the first person, the most comfortable, and what I think we have in common.
Yes.
So I won a raffle from Earth Island Institute to do a dance class, and the woman from Earth Island loved it, and we were going to go together, and that was years ago, and she's not there anymore, and she does fundraising, and she worked, and I'm like, I need to reach out to Rosella Kennedy.
Wow, very
Let's do a
good.
dance now. I could do it. There was COVID. And by the way, that was the first one who came to my mind. So I'm kind of connecting the dots. Yeah.
Yeah, and you have 3 categories of priority, which are you can decide which is most urgent. People who are prospective donors and supporters. So since we're talking about a nonprofit here, people who are prospective donors, but also people who are potential centers of influence. They may not give to you now, but they may know somebody who's a better match. And that's why the bonus question at the end of the 7 questions is always, who else should we be talking with that we might not have thought of? Because you never know who has a rich uncle or used to sit on a board with somebody or was a staff member previously on an organization that has gone on to do great things or have great connections. So centers of influence is the second one. And then people who have skills and abilities or access to resources that you might not have. Planting Justice 15 years ago recruited a bus driver for their board. And the bus driver volunteered to drive the bus. That's a very useful skill. And it saved them thousands of dollars over the course of years of having to hire bus drivers because they had a bus driver on their board.
And is that because they also had their own bus?
Yes.
I think it's Jonathan, I think.
Yes, that's who it was.
I know all those folks and Planting Justice. So yeah, Jonathan, he's in that bus on occasion with me.
So CPAs, attorneys,
Yeah.
whatever the resources you need, sometimes if you can inspire someone to join a board or committee, that's as useful as raising the money to pay somebody to do that. So our 3 categories are prospective donors or investors, centers of influence, and people with access or skills, resources, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And
so that makes me think that spreadsheet, I could have columns like the person, if they're all 3, if they're one,
right. And you can create codes and
you
can go data happy with your prospective people. And it's a good idea to keep notes on the 7 questions also, particularly in the early stages when you're asking what they've done in the past and asking them to tell you the story of what they've done in the past. You keep notes on what they're interested in, so and so attended the Kentucky Derby. And then next year when the Derby comes around, you send them a photo of the finish of the Kentucky Derby or whatever the confluence is between what they care about and what you're doing. If you can make those connections, cultivating relationship is really important. And I never give up. I talk with people for years. because you never know when somebody's life or priorities are going to change. Um, it's a little morbid, but you know, the woman whose husband controls the purse strings and she can't get philanthropic donations without talking with him, and then he dies. All of a sudden, it's a new world. Or people get divorced, or they get married to somebody who turns out to be more interested than they were. You just never know what's going to happen over time. So, having a newsletter and having periodic cultivation events, Pollinator Project is a wonderful example of that because they do wildflower walks and they do nursery tours and they do open houses and just opportunities for people to participate, and always inviting people and cultivating those relationships over time uh, sometimes leads to opportunities that are buried in your own backyard. Any other comments or questions before I talk for a while about how not to ask for money?
Yes. Um, just kind of going to go in for one that feels big and a little awkward. And if you've already talked about it, I apologize. And I will be going back and watching the videos.
Always bears repeating.
Um, one, I don't want to say, I'm trying to come up with how to not be disingenuous, I guess,
Yes.
is,
Mhm.
Yeah, say more about that because that's exactly our topic for today.
oh, fantastic. I'm interested in you. I'm interested in you as a person. And I also know that I would like for you to benefit the organization that is important to me. And how do I have that be transparent so that it doesn't feel like all of a sudden, I just turned the tables on you. And
Yeah,
all along, I wasn't really interested in you. I just wanted your money or,
right. Bait and switch.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, or self-interested money grubbing. I only want your money.
Yeah.
And as a fundraising consultant, I run into that a lot. Um, People who are philanthropic donors can see a solicitation coming a mile away. And that's why the referral with influence is so important. And so my response there is, to everything, turn, turn, turn. There is a season. You can define conversations.
Mhm.
So the way you started that question was just perfect. You can say, I'm really interested to learn more about you as a person and your history. And of course, we would love it if you would become a financial supporter of our organization. But in this conversation that we're going to schedule on Tuesday afternoon, I'm not going to ask you for money. I'm just going to ask for your advice. And that's really the crux of the Dreamosophy approach to fundraising, is be interested, not interesting. And so you're initially going to start out asking people what they've done in the past and at what level they've supported other organizations and ask them to tell stories. You're going to engage in facting, which we talked about yesterday, which is just point at something in their environment and ask about it. Oh, that looks interesting. There's a story to go with that sculpture? Because when you do 2 or 3 facting questions in somebody's environments, you usually stumble over what matters to them. If you ask them to tell you the story around some feature, whether it's a piece of jewelry or a t-shirt message or a piece of art or an award. Oftentimes when I end up meeting with someone in their house, they have art and photographs and memorabilia. When I meet in their
Books.
office, books, yes. When I meet in their office, they have awards on the wall and diplomas. And so I can ask about where they graduated, what their degree was in, are they still using it, those kinds of questions. But then you're also going to ask for their advice about your project. What do they like about it? What do they not like about it? What are you doing that they think you should not be doing? Is there anything you're not doing that they think you should be doing? Now you're asking for their advice about your organization, and that's a logical segue into, if we were to ask you for a contribution, could we count on your support through a personal contribution and asking others? You're not asking for money. You're asking for them to tell you honestly, can you count on them as a supporter? And I've been amazed to find out how often people are not uncomfortable about talking about that subject. They're actually eager to talk about it. They're happy to talk about it. They're proud of the things that they've done, the things that they've given to, and they want to tell the story. And so asking them if they would be support our organization is easy because they'll tell you yes or no or at what level. I mentioned the other day the guys that I met with about this church that's raising money locally. I said, could we count on your support and at what level? And one guy said, oh yeah, I'd probably give another 2 or 3 thousand, but I wouldn't pay for the building, even though he probably could. And the other guy said, yeah, I'm not in a giving mode right now. I'd probably give a few hundred. But then other times I've had that conversation with people who say, well, just ask for what you need. Well, that's usually $1 million request.
If, let's say somebody said, I give you this certain amount, don't you think that sometimes they're just waiting to see how you handle it and what the relationship is like, and that maybe they'll circle back and get more
Yeah.
invested? Then,
Y-
and then,
Yes, and I don't upsell.
pardon me?
I don't upsell. A
Mhm.
lot of fundraisers will say, well, can you increase that a little bit more this year? The telemarketing membership fundraisers always, you gave $200 last year. Would you consider 250 this year? I don't do that. I take what people offer because I'm interested in the relationship.
Mhm.
I'm not interested in a one-time gift unless someone says it's a one-time gift. But I'm usually very happy to accept. Excuse me, just a minute. I have a minor emergency that I need to deal with, and I will be right back.
Erin, you're in Phoenix, right?
In Ashland.
Oh, you're in Ashland. Yes.
And you're in Marin?
Oakland?
In where?
Oakland. In
Oh,
Oakland.
okay. Yeah. I love the Bay
Sorry about
Area.
that.
No problem.
So in this context of asking for people's advice, let's kind of return to the 7 questions. I'm going to share my screen again and make it a little bigger in hopes that you can maybe read it.
Have you shared this with us, or are you going to?
It's on the video. I could share a PDF of the PowerPoints if you like.
I
I
would
can
like
put them
that.
up in the LinkedIn group.
That'd be great.
Yeah. This question of how we ask for money is really important because the Dreamosophy approach is very much about not asking for money. I'm really interested in relationships. And I'm happy to cultivate relationships with people for as long as they prefer it that way. And when they get ready to support, they'll let me know. That is one of the functions of events. If I know who the donors are and I know what their capacity for giving is, scheduling an event that is specifically a fundraiser is a great way to deal with that. To create a context within which money can be raised. But meeting with people one-on-one is by far and away the most effective way because that gives an opportunity to focus on what they really care about, which may not be directly our organization. And we talked earlier in the week about this cycle of creativity. I call this the 7 C's, the process of creative dreaming, of moving an idea or a concept from possibility to realization to gratitude. And in that context, I'm really interested in talking with people about what their vision for a livable future is. and what they really care about and what they want to contribute to. Because somebody who's only interested in dressage riding is probably not a great candidate to give to the pollinator project unless they happen to have a garden. And then we can start with talking about dressage, but end up talking about gardening, and then we get into what is it that they really care about. The discovery process starts with a letter or an email or a conversation over the phone, preferably from someone who is known to the prospective donor, not me as the fundraising consultant, or even necessarily you as the board member or the executive director, but from the person who has the best contact with them. Who suggested that you talk with them? And can they send an inquiry? And there's a link here and in the LinkedIn group to a sample letter, and your homework is to adapt that letter for your use and to edit it down. If you're going to use an email or a text message, just pull out some key phrases that work for you to open up a conversation with people. Once you get into that letter, you can cut out phrases. The most important phrases are, I'd like to ask for your advice. We're not going to ask you for money at this time. Those are the two most important phrases to make it clear that this is not a solicitation call. This is an opportunity to ask for someone's advice. And as we talked earlier in the week, we're not just asking for feedback. This is not an evaluation interview. It's really a structured conversation that is designed to go through a sequence leading up to talking about potentially giving, potentially investing in your project or cause. And so when we say asking for advice, I specifically don't ask people for their opinion, because I'm not asking just what do you like and what do you dislike. I really want to ask for their advice because we're going to get into our plans for fundraising. We're considering a major fundraising effort to purchase a location or to hire an executive director or to be able to provide benefits to our staff so that they stick around, or whatever it is we're raising money for. We want to get to that point where we ask for their advice, not their opinion, but their advice of, can we count on you for support? And who else should we be talking with that we might not have thought of? So the letter is long because it's evolved over 40 years, and it started out as a paper letter where people will read a page or a page and a half, but they don't do that in an email anymore. So if you're using an email or text, just pull out key phrases that work for you. And then once we get an opportunity to sit down with people, we're going to go through this sequence of questions that start with, how did you hear about us? And have you invested in similar organizations in the past? Please tell me the story. What do you think of our current and proposed activities? Is there anything we're doing or proposing that you don't like? Are there any projects or activities we should be doing that we currently aren't? And if we were to undertake such a project, would you provide the funding or would you help raise the money? That's a really fun question to ask because oftentimes people are eager to help. And in that question, in the 7 questions outline, which I've posted on the LinkedIn group, there are many sub-questions that you can ask. If we were to form a fundraising group, would you sit on the committee? If we planned an event, would you sit on the planning committee? If we did a dinner, would you buy a table of 10 places at the table for you and your friends? If we asked you to join the board of directors, would you? If we asked you to chair a fundraising activity, would you serve as our chair? These are all questions that are tailored to the individual situation. I don't want everybody on the board. I don't want everybody on the fundraising committee. There's specific people who are qualified that I want to get into those kinds of activities. But then as we get to the end here, once you've had an opportunity to talk with people about their background and what interests them, there are lots of ways to get more deeply into the topic of fundraising. This doesn't always happen in the first conversation. It often happens in a follow-up conversation. But And as I said, I'm more interested in asking people, could we count on your support and at what level? And I often use a little chart that I set on the table, or I say, are we talking about hundreds, thousands, or tens of thousands of dollars, depending on the fundraising activity, what we're raising money for, and the capacity to give of the individual I'm talking with. But if it feels more appropriate to ask for a contribution, because a lot of people prefer to ask for contributions and just handle it all in one conversation, this is how I would do that. So I have three different forms. And this first question I learned from Tracy Gary, who wrote the book Inspired Philanthropy. And she's a philanthropic advisor in the San Francisco Bay Area, but she travels all over the world. She inherited a lot of money from her family and gave it all away. She started the San Francisco Women's Health Center and I think 12 different organizations that she
And
started.
Resourceful Women, I think she started.
Resourceful Women, the Women's Grove up in the Redwoods in Humboldt County, or maybe it's in northern Mendocino, up behind the Redwood Curtain. And she's just a wonderfully inspiring person, and she has no qualms about asking people for money. And so she goes to see people and she tells them about whatever organization she's working with. And then she says, I was thinking of you for a contribution of $10,000. How does that feel to you? And I've done this with for-profit real estate projects and eco villages and different startups. One of the people in one of our challenges earlier this year was starting a food startup. He was creating a new table spice called Spong. I think that's right. It's either, maybe it's Spog. Salt, pepper, onions, and garlic. So it's Spog. And his dream is to have Spog on every table in America.
I have to go to the
All
other
right.
meeting.
We love you. We'll see you soon. Hope to see you
Okay.
tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Bye. Bye, Aaron.
Bye, Marissa.
And so, depending on whether I'm asking for an investment or a loan guarantee in order to buy a building, I will tailor this question to the type of investment that I'm looking for. But the key element of this question is, how does that feel to you?
Mm.
So I was thinking of you for a contribution of a specific amount. How does that feel to you? And sometimes people will say, well, that's not enough. I want to do more. And sometimes people will say, that's too much. It's not going to work for me this year. Or, yeah, that feels about right. Um, and that I haven't asked them for the contribution. I've just told them I'm considering them for a contribution. And how would that feel? We're sort of dancing around it. And if I want to be more direct, if you were asked today, how would you feel about making an investment of $10,000? Same, different way to ask the same question. You can play around with it, but it's really important to get comfortable with these questions, to practice with your friends and to practice with the members of your board and to get ready to go out and ask people directly to support the organization in the way that you had planned. And then the last way that I use is, would you consider making a gift or an investment of $100,000? Now, when people are raising money for property, and this is relevant to the pollinator project because you may be trying to open a center or a campus, I will also say, would you consider offering a loan guarantee or a bridge loan to help us purchase this property that's available now? And that has been surprisingly successful with people who are not ready to give the money yet, but who have enough money that setting aside $500,000 or $1 million as a guarantee for a loan is not inconvenient for them. If they have a multi-million-dollar portfolio, most major brokerage houses also have a loan program. And so they can set aside a separate account that is encumbered to guarantee a loan for a year, 2 years, 5 years, even 10 years. And it's not as committal as giving the money because the organization is required to make the payments on the loan. And it only
And just
becomes a gift if the organization can't, and then the individual has to come back around and deal with it. What were you going to say?
this is interesting. Thank you. And I guess just to clarify for me, so the person who's setting aside this loan guarantee sum of money that's now encumbered, it can continue to be invested and earn money for
Yes.
them, for the donor. Okay.
Yeah. And that's why it's often called an impact investment,
Mm,
because they're going to loan that money to you, and you might also still pay them a few percentage points in interest. So if they have a portfolio that's earning 7% and you pay them 3%, now they're earning 10% on their money.
mm, mhm,
So it's a double dipping, and that's actually where credit default swaps came from.
mm,
Um, and so it's to their benefit to do that because they get a little out of it, and you get a very preferable loan rate
mhm,
because of the impact that you're making, and they're getting benefits out of that.
mm,
So this whole question of how and when to ask for money is an art. It's not a science.
mhm,
I don't ask for money until people have said, yes, you can count on my support. And I say, at what level? And they
mm,
say 100, 1,000, 10,000, ask for whatever you want. This conversation also happens with foundations, particularly family foundations, where people are talking with you about the possibility of submitting a proposal to their foundation. And so you can say, well, I was thinking of submitting a request for $25,000. How would that feel to you?
mhm,
And they'll say, well, we don't usually give less than $50,000.
mm, mhm,
I had a fun conversation with a supporter of a for-profit consulting group I was with 30 years ago, with a representative of the Trust for Public Land, or no, it was the Nature Conservancy, where they had contracted with us for doing ecological survey work for pollinators on a particular spot of land. And I said we were thinking of asking for $15,000 this year, and she said, "Oh, that's not enough."
mm,
And I said, "Okay, what would be better?" She said, "Well, we have this fund set aside by Caltrans. This is in California, because they put a freeway off ramp through the pollinator habitat,
mm,
and it was also a habitat for the endangered Stevens kangaroo rat." And so Caltrans had set aside, I think it was $1.5 million in an investment fund that earned at that time $150,000 a year. And the Nature Conservancy had to spend the money. And so they said, well, we would rather that you ask for 25,000. I said, great. So we added some people and added some time to the survey and asked them for $25, 25,000. They got it. So these questions about a range of giving are really useful. It's not a negotiation. It's just disclosure. It's just transparency. It's being honest with people, and it saves them time and hassle for them having to decide how much they're going to give. And a lot of times the answer to these questions will be, well, we don't know yet. We do our giving at the end of the year, so circle back around to me in November, and then you can still come back around and ask them how it's going and how their priorities are shaping up, and is it still appropriate to ask for $10,000? Sometimes
mhm,
they say that's not enough, and sometimes they say, oh no, that's way more than I was planning on. Or sometimes they say that's about right.
mhm.
I want to talk a little bit about where we go from here. Um, we'll talk more about this tomorrow, but when we get done with the Art of Fundraising free challenge, some people say, well, that's not enough. We need to do this. How do we do it? And so I want to let you know that I am going to be offering a 90-day fundraising accelerator that's going to consist of a once a week group session with a small group of probably 5 or 6 people, and then a half hour every week of individual check-in and consulting and advising. This has evolved out of the expense of hiring me to raise money versus me helping you learn how to do it yourself.
Mm.
Because when you know how to do it in-house, when you have people on the board or on your staff who are skilled at raising money, then you don't have to come back and hire me again the next time you need to raise money. It's much more profitable to have capacity within your organization that you can carry on yourselves. And so we handle communication. We cover with whom should I be speaking? How do I learn to listen more? What about all those marketing materials? Do we use brochures, the website, the social media marketing, all that kind of stuff? How do we get others involved? We can't do this all ourselves. Executive directors love to talk about that because they've been trying to do it all themselves, and it gets daunting. We'll also cover cultivating relationships. We talked today about facting. We'll do some practicing on facting and focusing on their dreams, not our needs. The organization has no needs, but how do we get focused on what they care about, when and how to schedule events and doing them, the importance of obtaining and sending photos to cultivate relationships with people. How do we make money appear magically? With whom should we be speaking? How do we create new opportunities for getting money to appear? What do you mean? What do I mean by be interested? And how do we cultivate? This is back to your question about, am I being disingenuous by pretending to be interested in this person's art when what I really want is their money? How do I help people overcome the stress of asking for money? Because most board members will run screaming from the room when somebody talks about fundraising. So how do we overcome that stress? How do we find out what people care about and learn the questions that we can ask that are not asking for money? And how do we practice and develop a less stress approach to asking for money? And how do we develop referrals and centers of influence? Cultivating relationships, for example, with the staff of a foundation that declined to fund your project? And can we develop relationships with them where they say, well, yeah, this is really not of interest to us, but this other foundation over here funds similar things. And I know their executive director or their program officer, let me introduce you. And especially in a place like the Rogue Valley, that's common. The funders know each other, the institutional funders know each other. There's a huge population of people in almost every area of the world who are quietly wealthy,
Mm.
who don't broadcast their wealth, who give quietly and are not known. I mentioned earlier in the week, I met with someone here in Ashland who has a big, beautiful house that's not visible from the street. And her late husband started a well-known online investment house, and they made millions when they sold it. And she's only been here for 2 or 3 years, and she doesn't know anybody, and nobody knows who she is. The Oregon Shakespeare Festival just
Mm.
successfully raised $6 million, and they found 3 people, two of whom don't even live here.
Wow.
Each of whom pledged $1 million for a matching campaign that ended up in $6 million.
Wow.
Um,
Does the
so
woman who just moved here need a pollinator garden?
yes, in fact, she's redoing her backyard, and I did
Ah.
talk with her about that, and she's very generous with her house. And so when the time is right, we should arrange a conversation because I talked with her. She lives in a shady area
Mm.
where she doesn't really know a lot about pollinators, and she's not thinking about pollinators. So there's going to be an opportunity there to cultivate that relationship. So the next step in something like this is to
Mm.
schedule a time with me. And so I'm going to put in the LinkedIn group, and I'll stick it in the chat also in a moment, uh, the link to schedule a 30-minute conversation with me to talk about how do we implement this in your organization for for you, it's PPRV, but whatever else you're involved in. I'd love to talk about it because although I am practicing to be an introvert, I still really enjoy learning about what other people are into, what they're passionate about. And so I do want to carry on these dialogues. Let me just quickly copy that URL into the chat so that it's there for people who are watching the video.
Interestingly, at least in my version of introversion, one-on-one conversations are a perfect fit. So I don't have to be completely alone, but I do very well one-on-one.
Good. Um, I'm just getting that. For some reason, the PowerPoint does not allow me to copy
Mm,
from the PowerPoint.
mm,
So I have to go copy it from somewhere else and stick it in the chat so that people who are watching the video
mm.
can download the chat from the LinkedIn group and get that link. So questions, comments, what is this provoking in you? I'm kind of hustling my bustle here to finish a little early because everybody seems to have other commitments today, and I'm sure the people watching the video online won't mind if we finish a little early.
Thank you. I'm thinking of a particular friendship of mine where, let's see, I want to also like not give identifying information about the other party in the friendship,
Especially
but
since we're being recorded.
yes. um, but they have their own personal financial situation, and they also control money that could be given as a grant. And so I approached them for that grant money. It wasn't a good fit, but I'd like to circle back and say, would you consider a lesser? First of all, I want to say I wish I'd known several of these questions before I did some, and I had a lot of like moments. Particularly asking how much would be an appropriate ask would have been a really useful thing to do. I was quite nervous about it and didn't do those things. But now I'd like to come back and say, okay, if that didn't work for that grant, would you personally consider this lesser thing, this something that's smaller out of your personal funds? And the relationship already exists. I already have some sense of why they might be willing or interested, why that might serve them well, because, and it still feels like the leap is too great to go straight to. And would you consider a lesser donation to fund this smaller thing? So,
It's never too late to do the 7 questions.
okay.
So even if this is a second or third appointment, you can take a look at the 7 questions. The facting and the asking them what they've done in the past is always appropriate. And if you can do a little research on who they are and what they've done in the past, I noticed you funded this program or you were active with that program. Please tell me more. I'm intrigued by your interest. Or the phrase, I'm curious, could you tell me more? It is very useful to get them talking about what they care about
Mm-hmm.
because that's a heart connection that's not really content oriented.
Mm-hmm.
What you're aspiring to do here is to get them dream streaming, flowing in the realm of their dreams and what they care about. And then circling back around to the pollinator project, it's also never too late to say, is there anything that we're doing that you don't like?
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that you think we should be doing that we aren't?
Mm-hmm.
And if we were to undertake that, would you know where the funding could come from, or would you be willing to fund that yourself? Or would you be willing to help raise the money for that? And then in that context, I know you said that this wasn't appropriate for your foundation, but would you consider supporting this personally? And at what level?
Mm-hmm.
I always ask people what level they're comfortable at before I ask for a specific amount.
Mm-hmm.
Because people usually tell me. They
Yeah.
tell me what level they're comfortable at. And then I can say what would be the best time to ask you for that gift.
Mm.
And I love it when they say, well, now would be good.
Mhm.
You know, or later this spring or sometime this summer, or we do all our giving at the end of the year. You know,
Mhm.
they'll tell me. And that is negotiable. You know, when they say, um, we could do our giving at the end of the year, please ask us in December. And I say, well, this is for a school program that starts in September. So would you consider making your gift in August so that it would support being able to have another 100 children experience this opportunity? And they often, you know, they usually say yes. It's,
Mhm.
the only circumstance where they wouldn't reconsider is if their money is coming from another source and they get their dividends paid in October and then they do their giving in December, or the company pays out profit sharing at a certain time or whatever their reason for not having the money yet. Or people who I'm working on an eco village project in St. Louis, and there's some very generous real estate developers who would love to support the project as soon as they sell another building.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And so as soon as that deal closes, then they can do what they promised to do for the eco village. Um, and it's important to ask those questions because then you know to plan your campaign accordingly.
Right. Yeah. Keep an eye out for that. I do appreciate the open-endedness and the choice that you're like all your questions are structured to give the person that you're talking to choice
Yeah.
and that feels fair, I guess, or something. It feels
Yeah.
respectful, kind.
And it's just me. I mean, other very successful fundraisers are much more pushy. One of
Mm,
my favorite fundraisers was a national representative for the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, which is the famous pro-Israel lobby, of which I used to be a key contact when I was in Aspen. And she said, "My name is Esther, and I'm a pushy Jewish broad from New York, and I'm going to ask you for money. So get ready." And people loved her for it.
I bet.
I gave him $18,000. It was great.
Wow. Yeah, I
Uh,
can see like if that's your shtick, if that's,
exactly.
but that will not work for me.
Yeah, it doesn't work for me. It's just not who I am. My mother said, "Don't go places you're not invited. Don't talk with strangers, and never ask people for money."
Mm, mm.
And so I break three of those rules.
That's fine.
Yeah. And the other rule that I love is the 3-foot rule. If you're at an event and it's a fundraising event for somebody else, then you're just there to cultivate relationships so the co-op gives a grant and there's 50 other grant recipients there, but they're also people who of means, or the Ashland News annual holiday party and all the people who advertise in the Ashland News are there, and you're just there to cultivate relationships. I use the 3-foot rule, which is anybody within 3 feet is the person I'm supposed to be talking with.
Mm,
And I start into the 7 questions. I get as far as I can get. Tell me about yourself. Are you an advertiser? Are you in business? Are you a philanthropist? Who are you?
mm,
And
mhm,
and they say, oh yeah, well, I'm here because I support this program. Or really, at what level? What have you done in the past? Tell me
mm.
about it. And if there's nobody within 3 feet, anybody over 3 feet tall will do.
That seems fair.
Uh, so that's probably about enough, since you said you have to leave a few minutes early. If you think of
Appreciate it.
something else, you know how to reach me. And I hope to see you tomorrow. We're gonna have fun tomorrow. We're gonna talk about how to overcome the stress of asking for money, and how do
That's
we
good.
create the context within which money can be raised. So thanks so much for joining.
I'll look forward to that. I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.